Telepathy. Telepathy is the direct transfer of thoughts, feelings, or information from one person to another without using any known sensory channels like speech, touch, or sight. The word comes from the Greek tele, meaning distant, and pathos, meaning feeling, and it was coined in 1870 by English philosopher Henry Sidgwick. Throughout history, people have reported experiencing telepathy during moments of intense emotional connection, such as mothers knowing when their children are in danger, or twins sensing each other's mood changes. In controlled laboratory settings, researchers have tested telepathy using what's called the mirror test, where one person looks at random images while another tries to guess what they're seeing from a different location. Some meta-analyses of these experiments, particularly those conducted by parapsychologist Stuart Veslov and colleagues at Harvard, have shown small but statistically significant effects that exceed chance expectations, with hit rates around 34% when chance would be 25%. However, mainstream neuroscience has not identified any biological mechanism that could explain how thoughts might transfer between brains, and the effects disappear when researchers add stricter controls against sensory leakage or statistical bias. The phenomenon remains one of the most studied yet controversial topics in parapsychology, with critics arguing that the evidence reflects publication bias, while supporters claim it points to something fundamental about consciousness that current physics cannot explain.
Clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is the ability to gain information about distant objects, people, or events without using normal sensory perception, literally meaning clear seeing in French. This ability has been documented since ancient times, with Greek oracle priests at Delphi claiming to see hidden truths and Native American shamans reporting visions of far-off battles. In modern parapsychology, clairvoyance is typically tested using what's called the Ganzfeld experiment, where a person in a relaxed state with eyes covered tries to receive information about random images or video clips being shown to someone else in a different room. Meta-analyses of Ganzfeld studies conducted by parapsychologist Eric Stone at the University of Edinburgh have found effect sizes that are small but consistent, with an average hit rate of about 32% across hundreds of trials, when chance would be 25%. The strongest results appear when participants are in deeply relaxed states, similar to meditation or the threshold between sleep and waking consciousness. Some researchers believe clairvoyance might work through what quantum physics calls non-locality, where information could be accessible everywhere simultaneously without traveling through space, though this remains a speculative hypothesis.
Psychokinesis. Psychokinesis, also called telekinesis, is the ability to affect physical objects or systems using mental intention alone, without any physical contact. The term was coined by Russian psychologist Alexander Sandoff in 1890, and the ability has been featured in countless folklore traditions, from Japanese ki powers to Hindu yoga legends about moving objects with thought. In laboratory settings, psychokinesis has been tested using random number generators, where participants try to mentally influence which numbers appear, with researcher Robert John at Princeton University's Engineering Anomalies Research Program conducting decades of experiments showing small but statistically significant effects across millions of trials. The Princeton data showed deviations from chance of about 0.1 to 0.2%, which, while tiny, were consistent across different experimental setups and over time. However, the mainstream scientific community remains skeptical because no known physical force could explain how consciousness might interact with matter at this level, and the effects are too small to be useful in any practical application. Some theorists propose that psychokinesis might work through what quantum physicist John Wheeler called participatory universe theory, where consciousness plays a role in determining physical reality, but this remains speculative. The phenomenon matters because if even minimally real, it would suggest that mind and matter are not as separate as classical physics assumes, potentially opening doors to understanding consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality, rather than just a byproduct of brain activity.
Remote viewing. Remote viewing is a specific form of clairvoyance, where individuals attempt to perceive hidden or distant targets using extrasensory perception, often described as mentally seeing locations they've never been to. The technique was systematically developed by the US government during the Cold War, with classified programs like Stargate Project running from the 1970s through 1995 to test whether remote viewers could locate Soviet facilities or down spies. CIA researcher Jack Schubert conducted extensive experiments where remote viewers tried to describe the contents of randomly selected envelopes or the location of hidden objects, with some studies showing success rates slightly above chance, but never reaching levels that would be practically useful for military operations. The most famous remote viewer was Ingo Swann, who reportedly described details of a hidden NASA satellite, including its color and shape before it was publicly revealed, though critics argue these claims lack rigorous documentation. When the program was finally declassified and evaluated by the American Institute of Research in 1995, the conclusion was that while some statistical anomalies existed, the evidence was not convincing enough to justify continued funding for intelligence applications.
Precognition. Precognition is the ability to see or know events that will happen in the future before they occur, distinct from regular prediction because it doesn't use logical reasoning or available information. The concept has fascinated humanity for thousands of years, from the prophetic dreams in ancient Egyptian texts to the oracle predictions at the Temple of Apollo. In scientific research, precognition has been tested using random number generators, where participants try to predict which number will appear next, with researcher Darrell Byrne at Cornell University publishing a controversial 2011 study claiming participants predicted future erotic images at 53.1% accuracy when chance would be 50%. This finding, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, sparked intense debate because it suggested what Byrne called reversed causality, where future events might influence present consciousness. Critical analyses by statisticians like Richard Wiseman at the University of London identified methodological problems, including selective reporting and failure to correct for multiple comparisons, and subsequent replication attempts by other researchers have largely failed to reproduce the original results. Although precognition remains scientifically unproven, it continues to matter because it touches on fundamental questions about the nature of time itself and whether the future might be less fixed than our everyday experience suggests, with some physicists exploring whether quantum mechanics allows for backward-in-time information transfer.
Intuitive healing. Intuitive healing is the ability to sense and influence physical or emotional well-being in others without using conventional medical techniques, instruments, or medications. This practice has ancient roots in traditions from Chinese Qigong masters to Native American shamans who claim to remove illness through spiritual connection, and it continues in modern forms like therapeutic touch and energy healing. Researcher Nancy Katting at the University of Maryland conducted controlled studies where healing practitioners tried to influence wound healing in diabetic patients, measuring factors like healing time and infection rates, with some studies showing modest improvements in healing speed but no consistent replication across different laboratories. The mechanisms proposed by practitioners include manipulating what they call biofields or energy fields around the body, though mainstream science has not detected any such fields using standard physical measurement instruments. Some research suggests that any healing effects might come from psychological factors like the placebo effect or reduced stress, rather than direct physical influence, with psychologist David Epstein at Harvard noting that patients who believe they're receiving healing often report feeling better regardless of what actually happens. The phenomenon is important because even if the effects could be primarily psychological, they demonstrate the powerful connection between mind and body that neuroscience is increasingly recognizing, with research showing that belief and expectation can trigger real biological changes through neurotransmitter release and immune system modulation.